I need to tell you something I've never said out loud before. 3 years ago, I quietly moved 40% of everything I owned out of the traditional financial system. No announcement, no headlines. I just did it. And the people who noticed, my accountant, my banker, they looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Today, they're calling me. Not to mock me, to ask me what I saw coming. What I saw and what I'm going to show you today is a currency reset. And before you roll your eyes and think this is another doomsday conspiracy, let me give you one number. This has already happened 7 times in the last 150 years. 7 times. The Great Depression, the collapse of Bretton Woods, Weimar Germany, Argentina, Venezuela. Each time, the majority of people lost everything. Each time, a small group walked away not just intact, but richer. The question is, which group are you going to be in? Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you is the uncomfortable truth that banks do not want you to understand. Here's the thing about financial collapses. They feel random. They feel like accidents. They're not. Ray Dalio, one of the most successful hedge fund managers who ever lived, spent decades studying this. And what he found was a pattern so consistent it's almost mathematical. Every 75 to 100 years, the global financial system breaks down and gets rebuilt. Think about it. The last major reset happened in 1944 at Bretton Woods, when the world agreed to tie every currency on Earth to the US dollar and tie the US dollar to gold. That gave us 30 years of explosive growth. Then, in 1971, Nixon quietly took America off the gold standard in a Sunday night TV address. Most people barely noticed. That was the next reset. And since then, we've been living in a system built on something that has never existed before in human history, money backed by nothing but trust in a government. We are now 50 years into that experiment, and the cracks are impossible to ignore. Global debt is at $315 trillion. That's 3 times the entire world's annual economic output. The US alone is adding $1 trillion to its national debt every 100 days. In Europe, Italy's debt to GDP ratio is over 140%. Japan's is over 250%. These numbers have never been seen before outside of wartime, and historically, there is only one way governments have ever resolved debt at this scale. They inflate it away. They devalue the currency. They reset the system. The clock is ticking. The question is not if, the question is when and what you do before it happens. Let me paint you a picture. It's 1923. You're a middle-class German professional. You've worked hard your whole life. You have savings in the bank. You have a pension coming. You feel secure. Then, over 18 months, the German mark collapses. Not slowly, violently. In January 1923, one US dollar bought 18,000 marks. By November that same year, $1 bought 4.2 trillion marks. People were literally burning cash for heat because it was cheaper than firewood. Workers demanded to be paid twice a day so they could spend their wages before inflation made them worthless by lunch. A loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. Here's what nobody tells you about that story. While ordinary savers were wiped out overnight, certain families came through not just intact, but with more wealth than before. How? Because they'd converted their cash into hard assets before the collapse. Land, gold, productive businesses with real physical output. These things retained value because their worth didn't depend on a government's promise. Now here's the part that should make you deeply uncomfortable. The mechanism that destroyed Germany in 1923 is not some exotic historical curiosity. The mechanism is money printing. And in the last 4 years alone, the United States printed more money than it had in its entire previous history combined. You've been warned not by conspiracy theorists, but by the arithmetic. So what do? Let's start with gold. And I know what some of you are thinking: gold is old, gold is boring, gold is for doomers. Let me destroy that idea right now with one fact. Central banks around the world bought more gold in 2023 and 2024 than at any point since 1967. The institutions that print money, the very people who run the system, are quietly moving into gold. Ask yourself why. Gold has one property that no currency in history has ever matched. Governments cannot create more of it. All the gold ever mined in human history would fit inside a cube with 2 3-meter sides. That's it. No printing press, no quantitative easing, no emergency monetary policy meeting that results in more gold appearing. But here's where it gets interesting and slightly scandalous. The gold market has a dirty secret. For every ounce of physical gold that exists, there are an estimated 100 to 200 paper gold claims ETFs, futures contracts, digital certificates. These are promises backed by gold that may not actually be there. When the system comes under stress and everyone tries to claim their gold at once, the math doesn't work. The people holding the paper will get cash. The people holding the physical metal will hold something real. This is not a theory. This happened in the 1930s. Governments literally made it illegal for Americans to own gold and forced citizens to hand it over. FDR signed that executive order in 1933. Most history books barely mention it. Physical gold, held outside the banking system, is a different animal. It cannot be frozen. It cannot be inflated. It cannot be defaulted on. That's why the wealthiest families in Europe have held it across generations of war, revolution, and financial upheaval. Now let's talk about Bitcoin. And I'm going to give you both sides honestly, because this one genuinely divides the smartest people I know. The bull case is compelling. Bitcoin has a fixed supply, 21 million coins, ever. No central bank can change that. No government can print more. It's self-custodied, which means you can store it in a way that no bank, no government, and no court can easily confiscate it. El Salvador adopted it as legal tender. Several U.S. states are now holding it in reserve funds. BlackRock, the largest asset manager on Earth, launched a Bitcoin ETF that became the fastest-growing ETF in financial history. The bear case is also real. Bitcoin is 15 years old. Gold is 5,000 years old. We have no data on how Bitcoin behaves through a genuine geopolitical collapse, a world war, or a civilizational scale crisis. And governments are not sitting still. The regulatory environment is shifting fast, and the wrong law in the wrong jurisdiction could make certain forms of Bitcoin ownership legally complicated overnight. My personal view, and I want to be clear, this is not financial advice, is that the risk-reward calculus favors a small allocation, not because I'm certain it works, but because if it does work as advertised, the asymmetry is extraordinary. Most serious allocators today treat Bitcoin the way they once treated venture capital. High risk, potentially transformative, sized appropriately at 1-5% of a portfolio. What I find most telling is this. The same governments that mocked Bitcoin a decade ago are now scrambling to regulate it, tax it, and in some cases hold it. That's not the behavior of people who think it's going to zero. Now, I need to say something that will make some people angry, and I want you to really hear it. Governments facing fiscal collapse have a playbook. They've used it before, and they're building the infrastructure to use it again. The tool is called Central Bank Digital Currencies, CBDCs. Every major central bank in the world is developing one right now. China already has one. Europe is piloting one. The US is in research phase. A CBDC isn't just digital money. It's programmable money. Money that can be given an expiration date, money that can be restricted to certain categories of spending, money that gives the government complete, real-time visibility into every transaction you make. And crucially, money that makes it trivially easy to implement what economists politely call bail-ins. In plain language, using your savings to cover the government's debts. This has precedent. In 2013, Cyprus. The government, facing bankruptcy, simply took money directly from private bank accounts above a certain threshold. The EU signed off on it. It was called a stability levy. People woke up to find 47% of their savings above 100,000 euros had simply been taken, legally, overnight, with no warning. Do I think this happens everywhere? No. Do I think some version of wealth redistribution framed as fairness is coming during the next reset? Almost certainly yes. The political pressure alone with wealth inequality at generational highs makes some form of this nearly inevitable. The assets that escape this are the ones that exist outside the system. You cannot bail in physical gold buried somewhere. You cannot easily confiscate self-custodied Bitcoin. Real estate is trickier, it's immovable and taxable, but rural productive property has historically retained intrinsic value through even the worst upheavals. Here's the thing about currency resets. They don't announce themselves. They arrive slowly and then all at once. The families that preserved their wealth through these events didn't act the day the crisis hit. They acted years before, when everything still looked fine and people told them they were being paranoid. I'm not telling you to panic. I'm telling you to think, because right now, you still have the agency to rebalance your assets. To decide what percentage of your wealth exists inside a system that has every incentive to redirect it, and what percentage exists outside that system, in forms that are harder to touch. That window doesn't stay open forever, and historically, the people who waited for the crisis to be obvious waited until the wheelbarrows and the breadlines they were already too late. If this raised more questions than it answered, good. That's intentional. The next video goes deeper into the specific mechanisms of how a currency reset unfolds and what the historical timing suggests about where we are in the cycle right now. The link is on screen. I'll see you there. And drop a comment below. What percentage of your net worth is currently outside the traditional financial system? I read everyone.